Breaking news: Jim Jones and Cameron, the former kings of Dipset, were recently arrested following a terrible backstage event that is rocking the hip-hop industry to its foundation. The truth may be more shocking than you could imagine. For years, these two have based their empires on controversy and disruption, then all of a sudden, gone too far. This isn't only a street fight, it's the complete collapse of all they've stood for. You won't believe the information we discovered. And now, for the unexpected twist. Behind-the-scenes secrets, betrayal, and mysterious actions are emerging, and the results could ruin a long-term relationship. Pay close attention to what you're about to hear. We'll make you reevaluate everything you believe to be true about these iconic hip-hop titans. Trust me, this is the story that nobody anticipated. It was meant to be just another night with Cameron and Jim. Although Jones celebrated another night of living the high life, what transpired behind closed doors shocked the hip-hop community and left the rest of the world perplexed about the event we're attending. Jim Jones, the fiery, unrepentant figure who is constantly finding himself in awkward situations, and Cameron, the self-proclaimed king of Harlem, engaged in a public altercation. That was more than simply a brawl. Both were expected to be profitable and content with their high-ranking positions, but this night was different, and what transpired between them would have an impact on the business for years to come. The crew was attending a high-profile business event, and it began like any other night with their faces plastered all over the VIP area, putting everything on display. However, something sinister was beginning to emerge. The tension between the two had been growing for months beneath those glittering lights. Keep in mind that these two haven't exactly had the smoothest of backbone of Dipset, but beneath the glitz and fame there's always been a simmering friction that nobody quite comprehended. Before long, the two began arguing backstage, and they were discussing something far more serious than a simple argument. The remarks spoken weren't just the usual taunts that start a verbal dispute. A full-on physical altercation, and the public was unprepared for the entire catastrophe that transpired. At the time, Cameron and Jim Jones were just two men, two heavyweights in the rap industry, reveling in their accomplishment. However, it turns out that the cracks possessed ego, money, and power, the same trinity that has destroyed so many others before them. Let's take a moment to consider how things got out of hand. Therefore, we must quickly remember that Cameron and Jim Jones' collaboration in Taipei was never without its challenges, ups and downs, and of course, memorable moments. However, it's clear from examining their careers that, in spite of all of their achievements, there has always been a deep-seated tension that simmers beneath the surface in the form of ego clashes, you bet. Opposing future views, to be sure. But the money game, the sorting game of who gets what, who's in power, and who pulls the strings was what really set everything off. Started to emerge, and let's face it, nobody grows as big as Cameron and Jim Jones without stepping on a few toes. From the beginning, there was a sense of competition between despite their respective roles in Dipset. It was evident that both men had different goals. Cameron sought to maintain his control over the group, while Jim Jones was committed to creating. Although they had often been able to work things out, the truth is that neither of them has ever been good at sharing the spotlight and wanted to be at the top. Everything began to spiral out of control when they battled, since something had changed and the stakes were higher than before. However, the thing about these two giants is that through they would occasionally engage in intense arguments and interviews, as well as exchange insults on social media. Public feuds never seemed to truly come to a head. Imagine the scene. On the night of the major event, the atmosphere backstage is electrifying, and people are anxious. Let's go back to a game where the stakes were fame, drama, and attention are racing in all directions to position themselves for the performance. Everything is put up, including the lights, cameras, and fans flashing cameras that are documenting the evening. Everyone wants that perfect performance. Filmed the ideal moment when Cameron and Jim Jones noticed something was off with their typical warmth. At first, a few words were exchanged, then some more, until things began to get out of hand. It was as the verbal abuse persisted, Cameron allegedly shoved Jim Jones, starting a violent altercation that spread throughout the entire backstage area. It was the kind of conflict you only see in movies. The two had already turned the backstage area into a battleground, with bottles, chairs, and equipment flying everywhere as they scurried for cover. Security heard in, but it was too late. But this wasn't just any fight, rather, It was a legal dispute between two people who had worked together for years to build an empire, and it seemed like we were now learning the violence was completely unimaginable, with punches, bodies falling against walls, people screaming, and the sounds of mayhem echoing. It caused fractures that everyone else had missed. The audience's reaction was even more intense when the news broke because it wasn't simply a battle going on in the auditorium. It was the end of an era and one of the most dramatic breakups in hip-hop history. Pundits and fans alike were shocked to learn that two of the greatest names in the game, Cameron and Jim Jones, were willing to throw themselves at each other's throats. In an instant, their entire careers and legacies were in jeopardy after throwing everything away for a backstage argument. The dispute between Cameron and Jim Jones wasn't only a debate, it was the subject of legends. There were rumors all over the streets, and the internet was flooded with comments from fans and industry insiders. However, as usual, the truth was far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The public was unaware that the struggle was just the beginning of Cameron and Jim's hatred behind the scenes. Let's dissect what caused people who had once were so close to one another to turn on one another, as Jones had been smoldering for years like a powder keg waiting to erupt. The solution, as we quickly learned, was more complex than a casual comment or a fit of rage. If you are familiar with Cameron and Jim Jones' past, you'll despite the fact that their relationship was never entirely smooth, they maintained a unified front and their collaboration was among the most well-liked in hip-hop. Yet beneath the glitz and glamour of Dipay, powerful individuals who were both driven for achievement and very proud of their heritage always had an underlying conflict. Because when you have two massive egos in one business would inevitably have disagreements. But after Dipay's demise in the early 2000s, Cameron and Jim Jones realized that their financial empire was more than simply their egos. Wasn't as safe as they thought. Jim Jones, the company's founder and leader, had always made the decisions because of his flamboyant demeanor and extravagant personality, wanted his own position, influence, and perhaps most crucially, a piece of the pie when money was involved. He was no longer content with being second in command. Come to light when Jim Jones's own career began to take off, it became evident that he wasn't happy to merely be Cameron's right-hand man and had his own goals for the future. Back and contest Cameron's evaluations of his position within the company, the tension between the two only increased, and suddenly there were rumors. There were rumors that Jim Jones was being forced to leave Dipset, Cameron was prepared to go alone, and there were discussions going on behind the doors that Jim wasn't involved in. Eventually, the fissures began to emerge, and others noticed that the two had not been spotted together as much. When they were, their relationship felt strange. The previous spark and brotherhood had vanished. Something had changed. But what about the real conflict? The event that defined the entire story. It wasn't just a random argument. It wasn't simply a terrible night when things got out of hand. Of all, the fight with the conclusion of everything that had accumulated for so long was not the result of a single incident. Rather, it was the culmination of months or even years of simmering wrath. Something eventually broke Jim Jones, who was obviously feeling the weight of years, when the two men were backstage surrounded by business leaders, fans, and employees. He obviously believed that this was his moment. Cameron, the alpha, was not having any of it. He had spent his entire career as the one in charge, and he demanded respect and authority. He wasn't going to let Cameron handle things without challenge, authority, and he wasn't going to allow Jim to start dictating terms. The argument began with back and forth criticism of business decisions, followed by insults. But what you need to understand that these were not just words but very personal attacks that struck at your own being. They went beyond the typical "he's a snake" or "he's a sellout" statements and were slashing at its basic identities, and that's when things got out of hand. It seems that Cameron shoved Jim Jones, sending him reeling backward, and in that split second, everything changed. Rapidly broke out into a full-fledged fight with Cameron's fist. Jim's security arrived, but it was too late. This wasn't only a backstage altercation. It was Dipay's demise as we knew it. The unrest didn't stop with the altercation. It became worse after the fight. Yes, you read correctly, both people were detained, and the men who had previously controlled the hip-hop industry were now behind bars. Those who contributed to the genre's development must deal with the consequences of their actions. Their names, which were before associated with authority and influence, are now a meld over every story. but the arrest itself was a spectacle for all the wrong reasons. As soon as the news broke, cameras flashed, reporters made disparaging remarks, and fans flooded social media with their thoughts. But the arrest wasn't the only thing that got people talking. The shock of it all was what made them wonder if the same icons, Jim Jones and James Cameron, would end up behind bars in 2023. That formerly wondered that they are now facing legal repercussions for a backstage altercation. It was a startling turn in a long-running tale that was anticipated, and the ramifications was only beginning. That everyone was wondering if Daipe would live, if the bomb that kept these two men together could be fixed, or if this was the end. For one of hip-hop's most, the real drama begins with well-known duos. Now that the dust has settled and everyone is attempting to understand what happened tonight, the actual repercussions of Cameron's confrontation with fans of Jim Jones are in shock, wondering if the mystery surrounding Dipset has truly been solved or if this challenging chapter is just the start of something much more exciting. It's difficult to predict how this will turn out, but the shockwaves are already being felt widely. To start, Jim Jones and Cameron were both detained, and while the claims differ based on the source, but there is some doubt that this wasn't a minor altercation backstage that turned into a full-fledged fight involving numerous individuals. As soon as the altercation became heated, security and witnesses recorded the altercation in front of a throng, who naturally began shooting on their phones. The arrest wasn't made. The worst of it was when the accusations surfaced, followed by reports of assault charges, property damage, and the possibility of a lawsuit from the venue itself. Allegedly had significant property damage during the chaos of the incident, and as we all know, lawsuits can grow swiftly in high-profile cases like this. Their legal teams went into overdrive, feverishly trying to minimize the damage because, although there is now no word on whether the accusations will stand, let's be honest, the damage to one's reputation is irreparable. These two individuals who once had the burden of carrying things on their shoulders are now embroiled in a public problem that cannot be easily resolved. Although the legal repercussions were only one side of the matter, what about the financial consequences? Cameron and Jim Jones have long been prosperous businesspeople, brand builders, and artists, but we cannot deny that their corporate sponsors, record labels, and business partners who invested in the Dipset, Coleman and Jim, are already feeling concerned about these developments. According to sources close to the matter, Jones brands both males as being dragged through the mud. Who is prepared to stand by them and want to be connected to this kind of catastrophe? According to an unnamed source, a major fashion firm that had worked with Jim Jones was reviewing their contract in light of the fact that other sponsors had distanced themselves. Cameron, who is well known for his several business ventures, may have to completely reevaluate his financial empire in light of the arrest. But let's talk about the fans, since this is where things really start to get complicated. Fans who had previously hailed the cohesion and Daipe have responded explosively to the age of social media, when everything is magnified and examined in real time. Strength is currently up for debate, with some supporting their preferred member and others calling for both to deal with the consequences of their behavior. The once unbreakable custom of Daipe is presently being investigated, and many people are beginning to question whether the dynasty is ending. On the one hand, there are the devout, angry followers who have followed Jim Jones and Cameron. These fans are angry, surprised, and confused from day one. They want explanations and to know why heroes are taking part in such activities. They find it hard to comprehend that their heroes' ethos that contributed songs like S Were High and Dipset Anthem might go from ruling the hip-hop scene to this disheartening disaster. These fans are also very loyal, and there are a lot of if their favorite rappers can make this scenario into a tale of redemption, people are inclined to forgive them and support them going forward, while some see this as the last but not least. They bid farewell to the Dipset they had known and loved before deciding to move on social media, where they encountered harsh criticism, memes, and opinion pieces. Notwithstanding, the argument between Cameron and Jim Jones was long overdue, and some fans have even gone so far as to say that this marks the end of a period that symbolizes the demise of hip-hop's traditional era. The entertainment business, eager to move on, is already aware that characters have been poisoned, and even though they will always be famous in their own right, this controversy will follow them like a shadow. It's too soon to know, but one thing is certain: will Cameron and Jim Jones be able to move on from this controversy and recover their careers, or will it haunt them for the rest of their lives? Undoubtedly, the public and media will keep examining every action they take. The real test will be when everything is said and done and both men are forced to confront their repercussions head-on. Everyone's main concern is what will happen to Cameron and Jim Jones next. We may expect a flurry of interviews, media appearances, and perhaps even an apology tour, but there is no going back. It is difficult to restore public trust after it has been damaged. Both men will have to put in a lot of effort to make amends, but it is uncertain if they will be able to regain Pheasant's enchantment initially made them well known. We are at the end of the story, or is it only the beginning? The truth is that the consequences of this backstage conflict are this drama is far from done. We might see more twists and turns, and we'll be here to report on them as usual. One thing is for sure though, these two will be followed by drama, debate, and betrayal. Characters for many years to come, and Dape will never be the same. So let's ask the audience, do you think Dape will end as we know it, or do you think Cameron and Jim Jones will bounce back? Ashes of their behind-the-scenes argument and redeem themselves? Please let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep up with this momentous event. The terrible details of the backstage altercation between Cameron and Jim Jones, the consequences, and everything else involved don't end here. Rather, this is just the start of a story that might impact hip-hop's future and destroy the reputations of two industry titans. So do you think Dape is done, or will Cameron and Jim Jones recover from this tragedy? We would want to hear your thoughts. Do you think they can improve? Is there a way to resolve this issue, or is everything going south? Please share your thoughts in the comments below if you think the narrative is far from over. Please like, and subscribe so that we can keep you updated on the most recent events. You can also use the notification bell to stay up to date on all the inner drama disputes and exclusive stories that you won't hear it elsewhere. And keep in mind that this is just the beginning. Iceberg. So pay attention as we have additional shocking revelations and previously unseen. You won't want to wait for the footage to arrive.